Europe today has little desire to reproduce itself, fight for itself, or even take its own side in an argument. By the end of the lifespans of most people currently alive in Europe, Europe will not be Europe, and the peoples of Europe will have lost the only place in the world we had to call home, close quote. 2 years later, you stand, but that's a very dramatic statement. 2 years later, you stand by that.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, in the lifespans of, as I say, most people, it'll be a different place. It already is. And I lay some of that out in remorseless detail in The Strange Death of Europe. Sometimes when things happen relatively slowly, people get used to things, they adapt. I give the example of the census in the UK, the last census in the UK, which showed that in 23 out of 33 London boroughs, people who identify as white British are in the minority in those boroughs. So that in the lifespan of, I mean, you can either like that, dislike it, or feel benign about it. But that's a massive change in just one person's lifespan already.
John Cleese tweeted, as we taped this, I think it was last week, John Cleese of Monty Python fame tweeted, "London no longer seems to be an English city." I think that's a close paraphrase, if not a quotation. And he was attacked, the attack, as attacks are on Twitter.
Yeah.
But he was correct.
He was correct. And by the way,
factually correct.
What he said is effectively what is boasted about by politicians, including the Mayor of London and the previous Mayor of London. They say, it's an international city. They're very happy about that.
Right.
But if somebody says, well, that means it's not an English city anymore, then they attack somebody like, whether it's John Cleese, me, or whoever, for heresy. I mean, it's very interesting, by the way, isn't it? I mean, John Cleese was attacked for the heresy of Life of Brian, 40 years ago. Yes. He's attacked by the clerics now. It's just they're the clerics of the far left and the social justice movements and so on. They just happen not to wear frocks like his previous critics. In the aftermath of the Second World War, most Western European countries decided that they wanted to invite migrant labor in to help rebuild. At the beginning, the idea was that they wouldn't stay. They would come and then they'd go home after doing the job. Unsurprisingly, they did stay, or at least large proportions of them did. And gradually, people started to be brought in even if there weren't jobs for them to go to. So, for instance, you imported large numbers of people from the Indian subcontinent to mill towns in the north of England when there were no mills anymore. And
the thinking on that was?
I'm not sure there was very much thinking. It was what we call the cock-up view of history, a succession of lazy and cowardly politicians who just found it easier to kick this one down the road and leave it to their successors to deal with. We kept changing the story of what we were doing as we were doing it. I recount in the book, we moved from the guest worker period to the multicultural period where you said, live in our country and sort of pretty much do what you like, to the modern one, which is become like us. Now, those are three totally different things in the course, again, of one person's lifetime. And I blame no migrant for being confused by that because we were confused. But in 2015, the movement got to its height of total unregulated movement. And this was the year in which it had started off in the beginning of this decade we're in, partly people fleeing the Syrian civil war, but then people from all across sub-Saharan Africa, North Africa, the Middle East, the Far East. And I started traveling to the camps in southern Europe where people were arriving in. I've been to many of the countries they were fleeing from. And it was a veritable United Nations of people. Now, in the eyes of some of the governments and many of the public, it was all people fleeing the Syrian civil war, but it wasn't. It wasn't. Even by the EU's own figures, at least 60% of the arrivals in 2015 had no more right to be in Europe than anyone else in the rest of the world. Gallup last year did a poll in sub-Saharan Africa. 1/3 of sub-Saharan Africans want to move. They're not going to go to Saudi Arabia. They're not planning to break into Yemen. They want to come to Europe. Now, in my view, the catastrophe underlying all of this is the presumption that every country in the world is basically a country for the people of that country, apart from Europe, and Europe is a place for the world.
By 2015, more British Muslims were fighting for ISIS than for the British Armed Forces. Yeah. By 2016, the most popular boy's name in England and Wales, Mohammed. Mm-hmm. By the middle of this century, this is a projection, by the middle of this century, a majority of Austrians under the age of 15 will be Muslim. And it is single-digit numbers of years ago that every one of those was unthinkable. Is that correct?
Yeah.